Hello, my name is Diane, and today I want to do a little end of the year series update, talk about all the series I read from this year, whether they're series I finished, series I'm going to finish, or series that I'm just not interested in finishing. I don't actually have that many series to talk about, considering I almost exclusively read fantasy, and a lot of that tends to come with starting series constantly. I've been doing a pretty good job at keeping up with series once I start a series and I want to continue it, staying caught up with it or completing it if it's already completed. I also just didn't read as much as I had planned on this year in general because I had other things going on and didn't have as much time for reading as I would have liked, which is fine. I still feel like I read a good amount. Still reading, the year's not over yet. But anyway, let's get into all of the series that I read from this year, starting with the series that I finished, although this first one I technically didn't actually finish, and that is the Vagrant Gods trilogy by David Dalglish. I never read the first book from this series. I started the series from the second book, which was a mistake on my part, but I had no problem delving into this world and figuring out what was going on, figuring out who everyone was. I think it was very well written and well laid out that I had no problem understanding it, even though I was not starting at the beginning. The story is focusing primarily on a prince of this island kingdom, and they are invaded in the first book by another empire, and they take over, they kill their gods, they kill the royal family, or so they think. This one prince has survived, and they are now ruling over this nation. We follow a group of people who have taken in this prince and are training him, and they are planning to take back their kingdom from the empire once they have built up enough resources and are able to do that. There's a really cool magic system based around religion and faith that I thought was really interesting, the way that people got their powers, the type of powers people could get from these gods, and also just how the gods were a part of their lives. I thought was really cool to see. I had intended to go back and read the first book before reading the final book, but I just never made time for it, unfortunately. I still might someday, but it's really not a priority because I already know what happens. But I did really enjoy this. I did really enjoy the writing and the whole world that was set up. The characters I thought were really interesting in their dynamics with one another. Really enjoyed it. So glad I did read the second and third book. I recommend starting at the beginning if you're going to pick this one up, though. The rest of the series that I finished are all graphic novel series that I had started ages ago and finally went back and finished for the most part. The first of these is Giant Days by John Allison. This is a series that follows three girls from the beginning of them moving into university. They're all assigned roommates and they end up becoming best friends, and then we follow them over the course of their college careers as they just deal with college and friendship and relationships and family and all kinds of life things. It's a pretty lighthearted, quirky kind of comic in the tone, but they do tackle a lot of major life events for that age, of things that people are typically dealing with in college. The girls all have very different personalities, and it's just a very charming story to read. I very much enjoyed it. I'm glad I finally went back and finished it. I definitely recommend these graphic novels. The next one is Rat Queens, which is originally by Curtis J. Weeb, and he eventually, because of behind the scenes things, left the comic but passed the title on to another group. I think it's kind of unfortunate the things that happened behind the scenes on this graphic novel because I really enjoyed it from the beginning. It went through a lot of changes and then it eventually changed writers entirely, and that was where I stopped reading it. And there were two graphic novels that came out that were by another writer, and I finally read those two, and they were fine. I liked getting back into this world and seeing these characters again. This follows originally 4 maidens for hire. They fight monsters and stuff. It's very D&D-esque in the fantasy setting and the types of monsters and races that are there. I very much enjoy the cast of characters and the world and the things they get up to, but it does get a little crazy the further into it you get because of some of the changes and the way some of the storylines kind of branch off and eventually come back together. Anyway, I think the writing style was definitely noticeable. Also, the artists continuously changed just in these 2 volumes. I don't really know much about the behind the scenes on these last 2 volumes, but some of the art style changes were kind of jarring because they were so different. And I think it was just too much change. I'm glad I finally finished the series and finally revisited this and got some sort of conclusion. There is the original creators did make an actual conclusion that I have not read. I don't know if I'm ever going to. But this was fine, but I'm glad that I read it. Then by Curtis J. Weeb, I read Dryad, which had 2 volumes come out, and then it just kind of ended. I think it's done. I haven't seen anything official saying that it's never getting finished, but it's been quite a while. But this is about 2 parents, and they have twins, and you see them when they're babies, where they arrive at this place that they now live, and then we jump to when the twins are teenagers, and the parents' past catches up to them, and they live in this little village. They think that there's no magic in the world, and it's just a very quiet existence. And then they end up having to go to the city, and they're finding out that there's magic, and the kids find out that all of these things they thought about the world aren't true, and there's so much more outside of this where they lived. It's pretty interesting, and there's a lot of things set up in these first 2 volumes, but because it just kind of ended, they never really go anywhere, and it really ends on a cliffhanger, which was kind of a bummer, but it was a cool setup to see. I still enjoyed reading the 2 volumes that are out, but if you want something that's gonna be conclusive, I probably wouldn't recommend this to you. Then I read Ascender by Jeff Lemire. I originally read Descender years ago whenever it came out, and I really enjoyed that series. It's about a boy who has this companion robot, which is just like a robot that looks like a little boy, so he has someone to grow up with and play with. And then eventually, as he grows up, he becomes like a robot bounty hunter, sort of. Robots are no longer allowed in the way that they used to be. And then in Ascender, it's many years later, and now he has a daughter who has never known those types of robots. For her, they've never been allowed, so she's never seen them. When one shows up at their door, he realizes that he recognizes this robot, and they get wrapped up in figuring out what's going on, why this robot has shown up for him, and also they're now being pursued because they have these robots that they're not supposed to. I'm not explaining this well. I feel like I'm not doing this story any justice in my explanation. It's really good. I really like the art. It's a really cool sci-fi graphic novel series. It's better than I'm making it sound. So those are all the series that I finished reading. Let's talk about the series that I have not finished, starting with the ones that I'm not going to finish. The first of those is The Hexologists by Josiah Bancroft. I didn't dislike this. I've heard really good things about it. I did enjoy reading it, but it just didn't stick with me at all. This follows a husband and wife who something bizarre is going on with the king. He's acting very strange, and they are tasked with figuring out what is going on and hopefully putting an end to it. They're like an investigative team. There's lots of weird magic and interesting plot turns, but I kind of just felt like we were going through the world and there were all these interesting things happening, but I never really felt connected to the story as a whole. So as much as I enjoyed the writing, I enjoyed the world, the characters were pretty good, there was just something missing for me that didn't really draw me in enough to make me really want to continue going with this series. So I'm probably not going to read any sequels when they come out. And then I have 2 more graphic novels. I read a lot of graphic novels this year. The first of these is The Umbrella Academy by Gerard Way. I had seen the show and I wanted to go back and see the source material, how different it was. It's not too different, but it's pretty different. This follows a group of children who were born under very mysterious circumstances. Their mothers were not pregnant until they were about to give birth, and then all of a sudden all these women around the world became pregnant, had babies, and those babies all had some sort of magical power. They all have a different power. And then this man adopts a bunch of them and raises them as like a superhero team. I really like the concept of this. I did enjoy the show, but I just felt like the way that the story plays out in the comics feels very disjointed to me. It was hard for me to follow everything that was going on. There's so many crazy things happening. So I thought it was a really cool idea, but the actual execution for me just wasn't really working. So halfway through the third book, I didn't feel like I had any idea what was going on. And everything kind of comes together by the end of each volume. But I just didn't care enough to get there, even though at that point I was almost done reading the series, because I don't know if there's 4 or if there's 3 and then like a spin-off story or something. Anyway, I'm not going to finish reading this. The other was Dragon Age, which originally was written by David Gator, and there are other writers throughout the graphic novel series. I read the first 3 of these, which is a complete arc. If you don't know, Dragon Age is a fantasy role-playing video game. I've played the first 3 games. The 4th one just came out, and I'm probably not going to play it. But I really like these video games. They're some of my favorite video games. So I really wanted to read. There are a bunch of graphic novels and also novels written within this world with familiar characters. And I wanted to try out some of them because I never had. And with all the hype of the 4th game finally coming out, I figured now's a great time. I read the first 3 and I liked them just because I like these characters and I like this world. But I didn't really love them. It just didn't have the same feel as the video games, even though it was David Gator worked on the video games. So it's not like someone completely different was picking up the series and writing in it. It just didn't have the same appeal to me as being in the world in the games versus just seeing these characters doing other things in the graphic novel. So if you're a fan of Dragon Age and you just want some more of it, or if you just like that type of fantasy world, I think these are good. I just don't care enough to continue with them, I guess. And for series that I have not finished but I would like to, the first is Emily Wilde by Heather Fawcett. I've read the first 2 books, which are the books that are out. The next book is scheduled to come out in February of next year. I am planning to read that when it comes out. I'm really enjoying this series. We follow a scholar who is, in the first book, she's writing an encyclopedia of fairies. Fae are real in her world, even though her world very closely resembles ours other than fae are real. And she sets off to small villages to complete her research as she's putting together these documents. She is very focused on her scholarly work more so than anything else. She's not very personable, even though she means well. And she has her friend Wendell Bambleby by her side, who is obnoxiously charming. People just tend to love him. Very different personalities, but also a very good dynamic between them. I shouldn't call him obnoxiously charming, but like compared to Emily, he's incredibly charming and personable, and she is just not very comfortable doing social things. Anyway, I really like this series. I think that their dynamic is really good. I think the fae elements are really interesting. And I just really like Emily as our main character. So I am excited to see what happens in the 3rd book, where they end up going next, what kind of trouble they're in. I think in this one we're going to be in the Fae realm for the majority of it, rather than traveling back and forth. So I'm excited about the conclusion to that. The next is The Forever Desert by Moses Osiotomi. This is a novella trilogy, and the final book is coming out next year. The first book of this follows a boy called Tutu who lives in this city in the desert, and they have extremely limited water that they get from another place. They trade their residents' tongues for water. And Tutu is approaching the age where he's going to have his tongue cut out. His mother, however, is dying from lack of water. So he goes to the city leader and asks for permission to leave the city in search of water, and in turn they will provide his mother with water to at least keep her alive until he gets back. They agree, and he goes out and he learns about the world because he's only ever known what his city taught him, and he learns the truth about the world around him and also figures out some things about the way his city is actually run. I really loved this story. I really liked going on that journey with Tutu and seeing him figure things out, encounter other people, and learning about other places that are in the world, and figuring out some harsh truths about his own reality. The second book, we are following another character who has a similar type of journey where they think they know what's going on and their relationship with another city. This is 100 years later, and he eventually learns that things aren't so clear-cut as he thought, and he needs to try and figure out where he fits into everything that's going on, and that is not an easy thing for him. And I honestly have no idea what the third book is going to be about. I'm assuming we're following another character. I'm assuming it's going to be a similar type of discovery about the world at large, but also something within themselves. I don't know. I don't really care what it's about, to be honest. I really love the writing of these. I love the story of both of these installments. So I'm just excited to get back into the world and read more of Moses Osiotomi's writing. And I don't know what the plot's going to be, but I'm sure I'm going to enjoy it because I've really loved the first two installments of this. Then I have La Fay by Sophie Keach. This is a retelling of the story of Morgan Le Fay, or Morgan from Arthurian legend. And this follows just Morgan from her younger years until she is an adult. The first book sees her from a child when Uther Pendragon first enters her life, and we follow her into adulthood as she makes her own family. The second book, she has returned to Camelot and she's trying to figure out her place there. And then the third book is going to be the conclusion to her story. I really loved the writing of this. I didn't know this was going to be a series. I don't know if it was planned to be a series when I read the first book, Morgan is My Name. But I loved that book so much. I was really hoping that there'd either be more or just Sophie Keach would come out with something else. That was her debut novel. So then finding out that this was going to become a trilogy was very exciting, and I really loved the second book as well. And some pretty major things happen in Morgan's life. Although this is a retelling, you can kind of guess the major points that are coming up. I think there are some unique twists on what's happening, and Sophie Keach's writing is just very enjoyable to me. So I'm excited to see her version of what's going to happen to Morgan and that internal dialogue of the motivation behind Morgan doing whatever she's going to do. But I have really been loving this series. The third book is supposed to come out sometime next year, and I'm really excited about it, but also kind of bummed that it's going to be over. Then I have Lands of the Firstborn by Gareth Hanrahan, the first book being The Sword Defiant. I loved that book. This is a pretty big fantasy world. We don't see like a ton of it. It's only following two characters, so it's pretty digestible in the way that things play out and the world's presented to you, but there is definitely a lot of lore and history within this world, which is something I really like in my fantasy. And we follow Alf, who is one of the 9 heroes that saved them from Lord Bone, and he is much older now, and he's been told that something is coming and they need to get everyone back together and prepare, but he doesn't really know what they're preparing for. So he goes and tries to find the rest of the 9 that are still around and warn them and try and get them on board in preparing to save everyone again. And he learns that good and evil in this instance aren't as clear-cut as they were back in the day when they knew we're the heroes and this guy's the bad guy and we need to stop him and then we'll save everyone. And now it's a little fuzzier with what's going on once you uncover what's actually happening, what's coming. He's not really sure what side to be on anymore because he doesn't feel like he has that clear-cut, we're all still the good guys and they're the bad guys, because of how much everyone's changed and the things that they're doing now. Some people aren't as good as he would like them to be, and the bad guys have their motivations for what they're doing. And I really like that conversation that he's having and that internal struggle of I think I'm the good guy and they're supposed to be the bad guys, but I don't exactly know what to do here. It's not as clear to him anymore as it used to be, which this is kind of a vague explanation because it happens at the end of the book and I don't want to really spoil what the big thing that's coming is. But I really loved Alf as our main character and seeing the things that he's discovering and trying to figure out. We also follow his sister as she's trying to track down her son who has gone off on his own, and she knows that where he's going is very dangerous, and she's trying to catch up to him and hopefully get to him in time. And we learn a lot about the world through her. I really liked her perspective as well, although it is a little more info dumpy at certain points, just because we learn so much of the history and the way things are. In the second book, which I'm currently reading, we follow a few more characters that we met in the first book, and I think that's interesting. As much as I really just want to follow Alf, I'd be totally happy with that. It is good to see all of these other perspectives and see more of what's going on in the world as it's expanding, as things are progressing. So I'm really enjoying that, really want to get back into it, but I've had so many other things vying for my attention. But I am excited to see where this story is going and get the conclusion when the third book comes out next year. And the final series I have to talk about is The Girl with All the Gifts by M.R. Carey. I recently read The Girl with All the Gifts, and while I didn't love it as much as I thought I was going to, I did really enjoy it. I think some of the conversations happening are really interesting. I think the world that he's set up, we only see a slice of, but I think it's a really interesting take on zombies. We follow a girl who is in this facility where it's basically a school, but all the kids are isolated. They're strapped into chairs when they go to class, and the adults don't really interact with them like you would expect adults interacting with children. And when this facility is under attack, she escapes with 4 of the adults that work there, and she learns about herself and the other children in the school, but also the world around them, this virus that has turned people into what they call hungries. And we see a lot of the adults kind of coming to terms with the potential of these children, and that her not being what they would expect her to be, and also her learning about why her relationship with these adults is the way it is, but also trying to figure out how she compares to the other kids that they encounter out in the world that are similar to her but not quite the same, not treated the same, not really behaving the same. Wondering where exactly on the sliding scale of human to hungry she lands and why, and if she can be like that, can't any of these kids? So there is a sequel to this called The Boy on the Bridge that I want to read. I don't really know too much about it. I know it follows the boy, and he's, wherever he's originally from, he's sent out for some reason. I don't really know the plot too much, but I am interested in exploring a bit more of this world. So those are all of the series I read from this year. Not too many considering the genres that I read, but for the most part, lots of good series that I've really enjoyed reading. For the series I'm planning to finish, I'm mostly just waiting on sequels to come out, which is not the worst position to be in. Well, let me know if you've read any of these, or if you have any series that you've read from this year that you're really excited about. Otherwise, that's all for me today. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.